I've been asked to mainly talk about the 2021 census and what may be happening and what could alter that. Did any of you see Question Time this week? Yeah. It was, for those of you who didn't see Question Time, it was the only Question Time I've ever thought I wish I was there, because I had a whole section of Question Time discussing the census and discussing ethnicity and the ethnic question, where the panel members of Question Time decided that they shouldn't be asking this question because they couldn't see the point of it. So, and also, if you looked at the tweets and Twitters, you'll see hardly anybody defending having a census there. Nobody pointing out that you can't do stop and search statistics, that you can't look at how many people the police employ, all the kind of things you can't do. There's a general misunderstanding that the census provides our denominators for doing huge numbers of things. And I haven't realised how little this was known. This talk is largely about Francis Maude. So we're going to have lots of pictures of Francis Maude as I go through this. He's a Cabinet Office Minister who announced shortly after becoming Minister, shortly after May 2010, that he couldn't see the point in the census and we should get rid of the next one. You may not have heard of this, as he said this. The reason you didn't hear of it was that ONS managed to shut him up fairly quickly because the 2011 census publicity campaign was underway. Luckily, the election was held late enough in May 2010 that it wasn't possible to cancel the 2011 census. I've heard several reports from people that say that if that election had been held just a couple of months earlier, there would have been enough time to cancel 2011. And apologies to people who were at the BSPS, a lot of these slides are from that, if you were there. But if you were not there, you've got to try and spot Francis. What they will do now is they won't say they're going to cancel the census, because they're not that stupid, at least after a few months of planning they're not that stupid. What they'll say is we're still going to have a census in 2021. But it won't be quite like the census you're used to. It won't include enumeration or knowing about small areas. It'll be rather like a survey, I suspect. And there's a consultation out at the moment about getting rid of the small area statistics. In other words, not having a proper census in 2021. How do you defend the census? I am going to keep to time, which means I'm not going to be able to describe these. And also, Janet asked me not to speak as fast as I normally speak, so I'll try not to do that. If you are trying to defend the census, you have to show that there was a reason for having it. That what we wouldn't know if we hadn't had the 2011 census. Well, for me, the 2011 census showed us there were more people here than we thought were here, 500,000 more. That was something of a surprise to me, which I'll say more about. These two slides are just for Becky Tunstall, who's in the audience. When ONS released the census figures, they tried to show that they thought they were safe by looking at the average household size and saying, look, it's gone stable in the last three censuses. But they released this little graph earlier by mistake. This is very nerdy, but we're at RATSTAT, so you're allowed to do this. And this little graph is interesting because it suggests that there's a potential for issues about 2011 census. If you're interested, the slides will be available later. Somebody should look at this. There is a general question of whether the census has counted more people than we thought there were, because the people really are here, but they're also in another country as well, because they're moving between countries. And I have a suspicion that's happening. But without the census, we couldn't even begin to have that debate about the accuracy of our numbers. Do people have more than one address? Are they counted in more than one place? The Scottish census has come out, and it has almost 100,000 more people than were thought to be living in Scotland. That's extremely interesting. Scotland was declining in many places in population. The extra people are mainly female, probably highly educated, mainly in London. Without the census, we wouldn't know that. Without the census, we wouldn't be comparing it with, I think these are NHS estimates, and trying to work out who are missed. None of that would happen. We'd be relying on the NHS estimates, although we wouldn't probably have an NHS by 2021. There's no obligation for criminal commissioning groups no obligation for them to register everybody like PCTs used to have, and so on. And there's another one of these kind of comparisons about people trying to work out what's going on, which we couldn't have without the census. We wouldn't largely know. I'm going to skip off error rates. This would all go away. All these kind of concerns of what's your sampling error on the census. Forget all that if you don't have a census. These are the geographical error rates for the census. They're very low, probably too low. But again, that'll be a historical interest. The idea to worry about that so much. I wrote this text before the figure was released in June, the census figure, about what I would interpret the census results as meaning, depending on how they came out. And essentially I said if the census showed an increase in population, it would suggest to me that this recession was most similar to the recession in the 1930s. The reason for that is this little graph, which you won't have enough time to see, but the essential thing is that in general, in the 1970s, 80s, 90s recessions, this country tended to have emigration. You leave a country where there are no jobs, that makes sense to do. But in the 1930s recession, and more recently, we've had net immigration, because the rest of the world appears to be doing worse. Without a census, you wouldn't know your immigration and emigration figures had any reliability whatsoever. The two censuses before 2011 showed us that we were over 100% wrong with our mid-year estimates for the changes that had occurred in 10 years. Only a census tells you when you're systematically getting it wrong. But if you're heading towards a night watchman state, where you don't really care about knowing how many people there are, because most people don't matter that much, unless they work hard enough to matter, you don't worry about these kind of issues. In fact, it might be relatively easy if you made a promise to the electorate that you're going to cut immigration down to tens of thousands. If you stop measuring things properly, you can claim you have done that. I'll skip over that slide about where the extra people are. This is interesting to me because what the census seems to confirm are the figures that Angus Madsen did and his colleagues did after he died, that the United Kingdom is out of step with all these other countries. It's not just population is going up in the UK, particularly in London. There's an ever so slight acceleration. And you need the census to know that that looks like it's true. Something very strange is happening here. Everywhere else, population is either going down or the increase is decelerating. I'm just trying to make you the case for having a census. Here's a lovely little diagram produced by Stefan Moisa. This is like a kind of Hans Rosling one that's been frozen in time, so you don't have to watch Hans running across the screen to understand it. And the point of this is just to show you that the UK looks strange. You see that our little worm is going a long way, a bit like Russia. And I'll zoom in there. This is our baby boom, our current baby boom, fertility going up. But if you're trying to understand this and put it in the context, you need to know that these figures are at least reliable. Now, if you remember, the census found an extra 300,000 young women coming into the country. Young women we didn't know were here, but we know about the babies. So I'll give you... there's a baby boom again, just to say. We need to know if this is right. London's heading... No, that's in the UK. It's heading 1.9 children. London has more babies per couple than Istanbul. All these things you would have no sense that they were at all reliable without having a census. You would spend your whole time arguing about statistics much more than having this decennial kind of check where, for somebody like me, I go, okay, yes, more people actually have come to this country. It looks like that. So yes, people are having these numbers of children. You've got some kind of sense that what you're talking about is actually true, and you can look over a period. It's going to be interesting to post-mortem, if you like, of the new Labour years, between 2001 and 2011, and see what's changed. What wouldn't we know if we hadn't had a census, and do we really need to know it? The first work that came out from the census statistics that were not the one number was produced by Stephen Givaz and Lily Simpson within a week. This is a record. Within a week of the area statistics being released in December, they produced a series of reports for the Boundary Foundation here in York, showing that every ethnic and religious group in Britain had become more spread out apart from Jewish people in London. And the only way in which Jewish people became less spread out was by having more babies, which is a way of beginning to concentrate. The 1971 census, it took until 1978, I think, before we got anything published. So analysis in a week is incredibly good. The bad news is that the papers largely completely ignored this. What the papers went with in December was Britain's turning black, this is terrible, what has happened to this country, you're getting ghettos, people are, and so on. They completely, and then they largely ignored those results. But those results will still end up influencing what is understood, and the stories in the newspapers will slowly die. Much later, about 5 times as late, because it took us to the end of January, Ben Hennig and I had to look for London at some things. I'll show you a map in a minute. But the census is showing us, or helping us to confirm, that housing tenure is polarising. Own occupation is going down. We're heading back towards, I call it Blackman style. The census doesn't ask enough questions, so we can know if it's Blackman style landlords. But we're certainly heading towards mass private landlords again. Kensington and Chelsea has gone down in population. In the middle of that city, it's going up in population. All the life expectancy and mortality trends. We have no way of interpreting what's going on with health statistics without the census telling us about the denominator. And also helping to tell us whether people stopped leaving spearhead groups or not. I'll shut up for a second. You get an idea. The census is required to give you a sense of which direction things are going in. The last time for certain age groups of the population, mortality rose absolutely in Britain was in the 1930s. So you want to look out for it rising again, possibly now. We've had our first absolute rises in mortality counts for, I think, over 10 years in the last 12 months. Nobody's analysed these properly to try to work out to what extent these are associated with the cuts. The immediate thing you think, when you know you've had 1–2% rises in mortality, mainly amongst the elderly, absolute increases, is it's people living in a little bit more fear of the home they live in being shut, of things going wrong. The Meals on Wheels just not turning up enough days on time to make life a little bit more. But you're only going to know that you need to look at that, and you're only going to be able to get away from the individual stories of tragedy to statistics saying the cuts are killing people with this kind of data. Why are they proposing to cut the 2021 census? It's been proposed to cut as part of a much larger set of cuts. These are the IMF figures for the planned cuts in Britain. If you're trying to cut many things, the census looks like an incredible wasteful expense. It's very hard to get the census to be popular again, to get people to want to have it. The reason Francis was proposing to cut the census so early on in the coalition government was that there was a special competition held in 2010 of who could cut the most. The competition was, if you as a government minister could put up more cuts than any other government minister, you could join a special star chamber and sit in meetings with Eric Pickles. And strangely, a lot of ministers wanted to sit in meetings with Eric Pickles. Caroline Spellman, the one I think made the word Caroline famous for the Tory MPs who were particularly nasty, Caroline Spellman offered up to privatise all our woodland. She was so desperate to join in this meeting, and she failed. And because there are lots of people who like trees, there was a lot of attention to that. Sadly, it turns out that the lobby I'd always imagined existed, the fans of the census, didn't rise up when Francis Maud said we're going to cut it. They were quite quiet. I thought family historians would be the great people, the people who look back at the 1901 census and find their great-grandparents and so on. But not enough of us are that concerned about what our offspring are going to think in 100 years' time about us. The UK line is here. So we have a cut plan which is bigger than all those countries. This is why not only has the census got to go, it's planned to go, it's almost seen as inevitability at the moment. There is a consultation by ONS, you can take part in that. Dave Martin, I think, is helping to organise it. And it's worth explaining why you might need a census and so on in that, but I don't think that'll help determine things. At the moment, we're not getting many good examples of what a census allows us to do, because so many local authority analysts have been sacked. They're some of the first people to be sacked, so there aren't people in Sheffield or in Leeds producing reports based on the census for the use of councillors in Sheffield or in Leeds. Councils are worried about fulfilling their statutory obligations to try to stop children being killed by their parents in their council. That's part of what's going on. Here's a letter from the former Chief Statistician of Canada. It's not just us. Other countries, particularly countries we emulate, this government is emulating part of what Canada does, are facing a similar problem. My view, because I know I need to end on time, is that it's worth complaining about this, but the coalition has already made up its mind. The coalition is heading towards a night watchman state. That is what they want. They want free schools, so you don't need to know school numbers, because you should only get a new school if you have enough parents who are willing to set up a free school. They want local authorities to decide who has to pay how much in a kind of new poor law for council tax benefits. It's all, the coalition have decided, they've made it clear where they stand. It'll become incredibly clear in 2 months' time from April, when the bedroom tax comes in. It's all coming in April. I don't feel I need to argue this, just wait until May. And then you'll see that it'll become very hard to argue for the census, because there are so many more important immediate things to argue about in May. So my conclusion about this is that, it's not next, I made a cheap comment about how the Romans have managed to have 36 censuses. And this is, I tried with Francis Moore's advisor, when they were talking about cutting the census, to say this is a really conservative thing. It's a really old-fashioned thing. It's a Victorian thing. You know, the Romans had it. Boris Johnson should go for this. You know, and this is what amazes. You know, a decent government would have the proper Scandinavian-style registration system. Why on earth are we? Last slide. Why on earth are we arguing about the census? If you want to do a job about the census, by all means take part in the current consultation to try and get the small area stats back. But more importantly, I think you need to work on the Labour and the Green parties to see that there's a reason for it and they need to have it. If the Labour Party quietly decides that this is an unnecessary expense, one that they cannot see, then I think you've lost it. The 2021 census will go. Why do you, I've put microchips down there scurrilously, why should you worry about it? It won't necessarily be microchips, it'll just be for the very poor people who go to prison, they have a microchip inserted. It'll be Experian being handed the government contract, which is the kind of, you know, non-physical version of microchipping us all. That's what you're going to get if you don't have a census in 2021. And if you don't like Experian, you need at least the Labour and the Green Party to see there's a good reason to want to bring a census or even something better back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.